Our story begins with a sister who set a single condition. Anyone who wanted to marry her brother would have to pay 50 pesos. She went around telling everyone that, although her little brother was a bit chubby, a bit dark-skinned, and a bit short, he was still an excellent catch. Her friends were left completely stunned by this, and naturally, they all did their best to avoid him. Until one day, a handsome man with refined features appeared with his banner at the party hall. At that moment, all of her friends simply went wild. They asked if this was truly the brother she had mentioned, the one who was supposedly chubby, dark-skinned, and short. It was all because she was famous for the obsession she had with her little brother. She was terrified that her friends would set their sights on him, so she always claimed he was short, ugly, and stingy. Because of this, since reaching adulthood, he had never once had a girlfriend. His adoptive parents, as we can imagine, were incredibly worried about the situation. They asked her what kind of wife she actually expected him to find. She told them that anyone wanting to marry her treasure of a brother would first have to prove they could treat him better than she did. Back then, he only thought of curling up in her arms, so she never noticed how much he was blushing. She had no idea, of course, that she was the true owner of his heart. His love for her was not something that society would easily accept. For that reason, he always made sure to hide his feelings very well. Until the night he was discovered, and the woman who had spoiled him to the bone slapped him for the very first time. She told him he had no shame, and the following day, she announced her engagement to his best friend. She told him not to forget to attend her wedding with Hing Yen. After reading that, he cried until he had no tears left to shed. And right at that moment, we see him receive a life-changing call from the family search agency. They told him the news he had waited years for. They had finally found his biological parents. With his heart heavy, he made the difficult decision to finally distance himself from her. He reached out to his biological parents, who were living all the way across the ocean. He told them simply, "Mom, Dad, I'm ready to come and live with you." On the other end of the line, his parents were overcome with emotion and began to weep. They told him how wonderful it was, calling him Xiao Yu, and lamenting the earthquake that had separated them. His parents promised they would come to pick him up immediately so he could finally return home. Deep down, he felt a strange and painful mixture of bitterness and nostalgia in his heart. He took a very deep breath, trying his best to calm his swirling emotions. He asked them for half a month, explaining that he still had a few matters to settle there. He promised that as soon as he finished everything, he would head straight to them. His parents agreed instantly, realizing they were being a bit foolish in their excitement. After all, the Su family had been the ones to look after him for so many years. They had heard that his sister, in particular, had spoiled him since he was a small child. It was only right, they felt, that he should say his goodbyes to them properly. But the moment he heard them mention Su Ban-ro, his heart skipped a beat. We return to the past, when a massive earthquake separated a 6-year-old boy from his parents. That disaster changed everything for him, leaving him alone until he was taken in by others. The Su family became his new world, marking the beginning of a very complicated history. We see that even though her husband was nothing more than a lowly pirate writer, his franchise was quite successful, often bringing home early gifts and surprises. When he was 10, he found himself longing for the sweets and toys of a classmate. She responded by emptying the entire corner store just for him. She turned him into a spoiled little prince, the envy of everyone around him. At 14, he fainted at home while suffering from a cold and a high fever. It was she who ran back and forth to bring him hot water, personally feeding him medicine, spoonful by spoonful. Whatever he wanted, she was always the first to place it directly into his hands. The locals used to joke that she was completely obsessed with her brother. No one knew that during those countless nights where they only had each other, he had fallen for Su Ban-ro, though he never dared to confess. He could only write about his love in secret within his diary or tell his best friend, Song Xingnian. But he never imagined that Song Xingnian would go and tell everything to Su Ban-ro. That night, Su Ban-ro suddenly burst into his room and into his heart in the worst way possible. She was in the room, and it turned out Song Xingnian had found that private diary. She tore it into pieces and threw the remains of his feelings right at him. Before he could say a single word, she walked out and slammed the door behind her. After that, she went out of her way to avoid him entirely. And on the rare occasions when they did happen to cross paths, her gaze was cold and filled with contempt, as if she were looking at a complete stranger. He wanted to ask for an explanation, but instead found Su Ban-ro cornering Song Xingnian, kissing him passionately. We can only assume that fate had already decided much of what was to follow. The ending was already written. He and Su Ban-ro never stood a chance. It seemed all those years in the Su household were destined to be nothing more than a dream, a fleeting illusion. Now, the time had finally come for him to return to his own path. So, he made a choice. He would return to the home where he truly belonged and leave behind his long-held feelings for Su Ban-ro. That day, he went downstairs with a heavy but resolved heart. We see his adoptive parents there, calling out to him with genuine enthusiasm to join them for breakfast. He offered them a gentle smile, walked over, and took his seat beside them. It was then that he told them the news. He had found his biological parents and decided to go abroad to find them. He laid it all out for his adoptive parents, right then and there. They told him it was a good thing, and that his mother was truly happy he had finally found his real family. Then came the question, had he told his sister yet? He froze at the mention of her. Why bother telling Su Banro? These days, she only had eyes for Song Xingyan. Deep down, he wondered what difference it would even make whether he told her or not. Suddenly, a voice asked what he wanted to tell her, and he spun around instantly. There she was, standing in the doorway. He quickly told her it was nothing. He called her sister, noting she had returned. Hearing that word for the first time in so long, Su Banro stopped dead in her tracks. He couldn't help but look inward, reflecting deeply on their shared past. When exactly was it that he had stopped calling her his sister? At 18? Perhaps it was at 15, or maybe even earlier than that. And now, after all this time, he had gone back to calling her sister. Su Banro's gaze deepened as she watched him intently for a long moment, sensing that something in him had fundamentally changed. A few seconds passed before she finally lowered her eyes and looked away. She walked over to the table and set down the gifts she had brought with her. With a calm voice, she told her parents that these were the gifts Xing Nian had bought for them. She added that it was just a small gesture and that he hoped they would like them. They insisted they loved them, noting that Xing Nian's gifts were always far more than just a small detail. They asked her if she had remembered to thank him on their behalf, which, of course, she had. The mother then told Banro to take the black tea from the cabinet the next time she visited Xing Nian's family. She even suggested that if they were free this weekend, she should invite him and his parents over to the house. It was more than obvious that they were eager to start discussing the wedding arrangements. He remained seated in his place, watching the three of them in silence. In that moment, a sudden wave of loneliness washed over him. He dug his nails into the palm of his hand, only to quickly let go and relax his grip. He felt it again with absolute clarity. In this family, he was nothing more than a stranger. But he told himself that, in the future, he would no longer have to worry about such things. With that thought in mind, he quietly stood up and began walking toward his room. Hearing the movement, Su Banro looked up from her conversation with her parents. She only managed to see his back as he disappeared behind the door. She wondered if it was just her imagination, noting that since she arrived, he had only spoken a single word. He didn't seem anything like the person he used to be. That afternoon, he took the family registry and headed to the police station to process his change of address. As he came downstairs, we see Song Jinyan sitting beside Su Banro, watching her with a smile while she peeled a tangerine. Su Banro's slender fingers worked with practiced skill as she peeled the fruit. She carefully removed the white strings one by one, focusing entirely on the task at hand. With their mother nowhere in sight, she broke off a segment and held it up to Song Jinyan's mouth. Song Jinyan blushed slightly as he looked at her, clearly touched by the gesture. Docilely, he took a bite of the tangerine she was holding out for him. Su Banro let out a soft, amused little giggle at his reaction. She pulled a tissue from the box nearby and gently wiped the corner of his lips. She asked if it was sweet, and Song Jinyan nodded before offering a segment back to her. He insisted she try it too. Witnessing such an intimate scene, our protagonist quietly looked away and headed for the door. Suddenly, he heard his name, Xiaoyu, and turned to see Song Jingyang gesturing for him to stop. He mentioned that Banro was resting today, and they had planned a fun trip to the park. He asked if he wanted to join them, but the young man replied that he didn't want to interrupt their date. The father insisted they were family, asking how he could possibly be an interruption. He simply replied that he had other things to do, and that perhaps they could go another time. Upon hearing this second refusal, the smile on Song Jingyang's face visibly froze. He asked Xiaoyu if he was still angry with him for stealing his sister away. He wondered aloud if that was the real reason he didn't want to go out with them. "The one I've always loved is you," he added, making his feelings quite clear. He asked how he could possibly call it stealing, a comment that made Song Jingyang's ears turn bright red. Su Banro let out a soft giggle and, without a second thought, threw herself into his arms. She told him that if the boy didn't want to go, he shouldn't be forced to. She insisted he be left in peace, and so, it seemed everyone would simply go their separate ways. Our protagonist said his goodbyes politely, turned around, and walked out the door. After processing his change of address, he left the police station and headed straight for the racing club. Once inside the office, we see an entire wall dedicated to his history. It was covered from top to bottom with trophies and photos from various competitions over the years. He looked at it all, his eyes filled with nostalgia and the quiet sadness of knowing he had to leave. Deep down, he never imagined that his final goodbye would arrive so suddenly. His coach walked in and gave him a supportive pat on the shoulder. Looking at the man who had guided him for 10 years, the emotions he had been suppressing rushed back to his throat. He pinched the palm of his hand, trying to keep his composure. He took a deep breath and finally told him, "Coach, I'm leaving the country." He explained that his biological parents had finally found him. He told him he wanted to go and live with them abroad. The coach called it wonderful news and asked if he would keep competing once he left. Racing had always been his dream, the one thing that truly defined him. He wasn't about to give it all up just like that, not after everything he had achieved. "I'll keep going," he told himself, determined not to give up just like that. The coach asked if he was leaving immediately, noting that the country's most important race was about to begin. It was a golden opportunity, and this time, he had a real shot at winning the championship. He explained he'd already spoken with his parents. He would settle his affairs here first and then depart. There was still half a month left, which was just enough time to finish this final competition. Only then did the coach feel a sense of relief, giving him a final, encouraging pat on the shoulder. We see them stay there for a while longer, chatting and reminiscing about their years together. It was already quite late when he gathered his things and headed home, only to find Song Yin still there. Listening closely, he realized they were deep in conversation regarding the upcoming wedding plans. The groom-to-be claimed to be completely overwhelmed by the different styles of suits and wedding dresses. He mentioned he was thinking of asking Xiaoyu to help him make the final decisions. After all, they had been the best of friends for so many years, or so he claimed. He insisted that Xiaoyu knew his tastes perfectly, saying this just as our protagonist walked through the door. His family chimed in, telling Xiaoyu that his future brother-in-law was truly worried about the matter. They suggested he accompany him over the next few days to help pick out everything for the wedding. He looked at Song Yin, who wore a faint smile that turned into a mocking smirk the moment their eyes met. He took a moment to consider the request, but ultimately, he decided to refuse. He apologized, explaining that he simply didn't have the time with so much work left at the club. With only half a month left before his departure, every single second had become precious. He still had many loose ends to tie up, and going shopping with Song Yin was certainly not on his list. But the moment he said those words, the atmosphere in the room turned incredibly tense. His father snapped, asking if he couldn't just set his own affairs aside since his brother was getting married. The matter was settled then and there. His father declared he would go personally to request a leave of absence for him. If his father intended to use his authority to force the issue, Xiaoyu felt he had no right to refuse. Upon hearing this, a small smile formed on his lips. It was a bitter smile, to be honest. He said nothing more, and over the following days, he was forced to set everything aside. He had to give Song Yin his full attention while they chose every detail for the wedding. He assumed a quick trip to the department store would suffice, but instead, he was dragged from one end of the city to the other. From the wedding dress down to the most insignificant wine glass, Song Yin insisted that he be the one to decide everything. When he suggested it might be better to ask the bride, Ban Ro, the man simply claimed he couldn't. He repeated it over and over. He couldn't. He simply could not do it. He seemed stuck, and Xiaoyu began to realize there was no way to satisfy his endless demands. The two of them were at a standstill. Song Yin spent his nights drinking at bars, and when Xiaoyu finally returned home, the tension remained. As the wedding date approached, the pressure was mounting, and the late nights at the bar were starting to take their toll. During those days, the chaos of the nightlife seemed to follow them home, but Xiaoyu endured it all in silence. He refused to give Song Yin the emotional reaction he was so clearly looking for. And just as Song Yin was about to say something else, he caught a glimpse of a woman standing in the doorway. He called out to Ban Ro, asking what she was doing there, before rushing over to throw himself into her arms. He asked her if she wasn't supposed to be at the mountain temple offering up her prayers. She explained that she had taken half a day off just to come and find him. He explained that Xiaoyu had been staying with him over the last few days. He then asked why she didn't join them, but Ban Ro didn't even bother to look his way. She simply gathered the things they had bought and began walking toward the exit. With the distant tolling of the bells, we see the dense fog finally begin to dissipate. The mountain landscape outside the temple slowly revealed itself before our eyes. Xiaoyu walked with his head down, carefully watching the stone path beneath his feet. He was stepping toward the exit when a voice interrupted his thoughts. And what was this? He looked up and saw Song Jingyan standing quietly in front of a Bodhi tree. The man was gazing toward the sky, bathed in light, looking intently at the wish tablets hanging from the branches. One read, "May my little Xiaoyu always be happy, year after year." Another wished for every year to be filled with prosperity. It continued, "May Xiaoyu have a life full of blessings, free from illness or disaster. May all the people he desires be of good heart. May my boy, Xiaoyu, be safe and at peace day and night, year after year." It was signed by the devout Ban Ro. Seeing those tablets made his heart tremble as his thoughts drifted away. Because of that great earthquake years ago, his health had always been quite fragile. He was always falling ill. If it wasn't one thing, it was another, to be honest. To ensure he recovered quickly, Ban Ro used to come to the temple every single week. She would hang a wish tablet for him, praying that he would remain safe and sound. He never imagined that, after all these years, Ban Ro had hung so many of them. Now, those tablets still hang from the tree, but he knew that he and Ban Ro could never go back to the way they were. "My, how close you two siblings are," Song Jingyan remarked with a hint of bitterness. He felt like an outsider there, and eventually, Song Jingyan simply couldn't bring himself to keep reading. Ban Ro's face darkened instantly as she told him not to start with the drama. She asked how he could possibly feel like an outsider when he was the one who was going to be her husband. She insisted that Xiaoyu was only her brother, and if it made him unhappy, she would have all of this removed. After saying that, Ban Ro turned away without a second thought. And just like that, the past began to crumble. It felt as though Ban Ro was truly leaving him behind, piece by piece. One after another, the wish tablets that had once prayed for his safety fell to the ground in a cold, steady succession. We see people trampling over them carelessly, staining the old promises with mud and dirt. Before long, the tree was filled once again, but this time with entirely new talismans. These were all messages of love that Su Ban-ro had written specifically for Song Jingyan. Only then did Song Jingyan finally allow a smile to return to his face. He threw a smug, self-satisfied look toward Xiaoyu, as if he had won a great prize. She told him that if she was willing to do this, there was no reason for him to be angry anymore. She questioned how a brother could ever be more important than her own husband, which was a harsh blow, to be honest. With those words, she finally managed to make Song Jingyan happy again. On the way back to the city, he stayed glued to Su Ban-ro's side, refusing to let go. Meanwhile, Xiaoyu sat quietly in the back seat, watching the world go by. He closed his eyes, preparing to get some rest, when suddenly the car accelerated with a violent, unexpected jerk. He opened his eyes, and, just as he was about to ask what was happening, he heard a deafening crash. The car suddenly lost control, smashed through the guardrail, and flipped several times. Finally, it came to a stop, wedged deep in a mountain ditch. His head slammed violently against the back of the seat. Everything went black, and when he finally regained consciousness, he realized he was completely pinned in his seat. A branch had brutally pierced through his arm, trapping him further. Beside him, Song Jingyan was also unconscious. He didn't appear to be injured. It seemed he had simply fainted from the shock, which, to be honest, says quite a lot. In the driver's seat, Su Ban-ro was the first to react. She quickly broke the window and managed to crawl out of the wreckage. She staggered a few times before she was finally able to stand on her own 2 feet. We see her look back at them, at Xiaoyu, who was gasping in pain, and at the unconscious Song Jingyan. She hesitated for only a brief moment before pulling Song Jingyan onto her back. She told him she would take Jingyan first and that she would send a message to her mother later. Without another glance, she hurried away with Song Jingyan on her back, as if terrified that the slightest thing might happen to him. In that moment, as she chose to abandon him, he told himself he would never cry for her again. From then on, he would live only for himself. Yet as he lay trapped in the ravine, he couldn't help but remember the earthquake from years ago. Imagine the scene, buried under rubble in the underground darkness, with no one there but himself. He had been trapped there for 3 days and 3 nights. Even after the Su family adopted him, he would dream of those days every night, shivering and weeping beneath his sheets. In those dark moments, Su Ban-ro would always run to his room and hold him tightly. She would tell him not to be afraid and that his sister was right there with him. She promised that, from then on, she would never let anyone cause him the slightest bit of harm. But now, in the cold reality of the present, he watched her figure grow smaller and smaller. He watched until she disappeared completely from his sight, leaving him behind. The sky continued to grow darker with every passing minute. And yet, he continued to wait in vain for Su Ban-ro to return for him. He smiled bitterly, and, gathering his last ounce of strength while ignoring the agony, he managed to struggle out of the car. Then, gritting his teeth against the scream, he violently tore the branch from his own arm. Finally, he began to crawl toward the surface, inch by painful inch. There was no light to be seen anywhere. He had no idea how long he had been dragging himself through the dirt. Eventually, he reached the main road and collapsed, losing consciousness entirely. We return to the story as he wakes up, finding himself in a quiet hospital bed. His arm was heavily wrapped in a thick, white bandage. His last memory was of a kind-hearted stranger passing by who had stopped to rescue him. Since he had been hospitalized, Su Ban-ro hadn't come to visit him even once. He overheard a nurse mentioning that she was busy taking care of Song Jingyan. Song Jingyan only had minor scratches, yet she had rented an entire floor for him, which is a bit excessive, wouldn't you say? Hearing that, he instinctively looked down at his own arm, hidden beneath the layers of gauze. He suddenly remembered the time she had him hospitalized for nothing more than a simple cold. Back then, Su Ban-ro had treated it like the end of the world, refusing to leave his side for even a single second. On the day he was finally discharged, many of his friends came to see him. Among them was a girl who had once tried to win his heart. Seeing the flowers she offered, his first instinct was to refuse, but she nervously interrupted him, saying, "Xiaoyu, please don't take this the wrong way. They are only to celebrate that you are finally out of the hospital. I know you'll be leaving soon. I just want everything to go very, very well for you from now on." Hearing her words, he froze for a moment, but as he turned around, he saw Su Ban-ro standing right there at the entrance. As far as he could remember, she almost never lost her temper, but in that moment, her face was like a thundercloud. She glared at him, staring at the flowers in his hand, and without a word, she turned on her heel and left. He was left completely confused, unable to understand why she was so angry, but he didn't give it much thought at the time. As soon as he got home, he placed the flowers in a vase. Suddenly, there was a knock at the door. He leaned against the wall for support and walked slowly to answer it. When he opened the door, there stood Su Ban-ro. Ever since she had found out about his true feelings, their relationship had become cold and distant. Su Ban-ro hadn't knocked on his bedroom door even once during that time. What could she want now? He had barely opened his mouth to speak when she suddenly threw her arms around him. Her movement was so unexpected that it forced him to stumble back several steps. The next morning, as he stepped out of the guest room, he saw Su Ban-ro approaching him with a deep frown. She looked at him and asked, "What am I doing in your room?" Seeing that she remembered absolutely nothing of what had happened, he simply stayed there in the room. He was about to explain the situation to her, but she interrupted him with a chilling coldness. "Did you actually bring me in here?" she demanded, her voice sharp. "Xiaoyu, I've already told you that there is no possibility of anything happening between us. And to top it all off, I am already getting married. Have you still not given up yet?" she asked, which, to be honest, was a devastating blow. He stood there, frozen like stone, before finally lowering his head in a heavy silence. He wondered what the point of speaking even was, feeling as though loving her was his original sin. Deep down, he realized that in her eyes, every single thing he did was now wrong. Seeing him like that, eyes reddened and gaze fixed on the floor, Su Ban-ro felt her breath hitch for a moment. Just as she was about to step toward him, a man's soft voice called out her name from outside. The man entered and moved to put his arm around her, but her smile suddenly froze. "What happened to your lip?" he asked, noticing a mark. "Did you hurt yourself?" "It's nothing," she replied quickly. "A mosquito must have bitten me, that's all." She touched her lip absent-mindedly, and then shot Xiaoyu a long, unreadable look. After that day, we see that he was never alone with Su Ban-ro again. She was busy spending all her time with Song Jingyan, while he had to focus entirely on his training. One day, just as he was about to get into his car to begin his practice session, his coach suddenly approached him, accompanied by Su Ban-ro and Song Jingyan, to make an introduction. "I'd like you to meet Song Jingyan, a pilot joining us by special recommendation from Miss Su. Let's all give him a warm round of applause to welcome him," the coach announced. Amidst the clapping, the coach looked toward the back and told Xiaoyu that he would be in charge of Jingyan from now on. After the introductions, the coach respectfully accompanied Su Ban-ro and Song Jingyan to handle the necessary paperwork. The very moment the door clicked shut, the rest of the group began to whisper among themselves. "Hey, I heard Song Jingyan tried to join the club before, but he didn't make the cut and was rejected." "Well, that just shows you the kind of influence Miss Su has," another added with a smirk. "A single word from her was enough for him to walk right in as if it were nothing at all. In my day, we had to go through grueling trials just to get a foot in the door. There's simply no comparison, is there?" they muttered, clearly unimpressed by the newcomer. The envious comments continued to flow, filling the air with a certain bitterness. For a moment, Xiaoyu stood there with a lost expression, his gaze fixed on nothing in particular. He felt, perhaps correctly, that no one knew Su Ban-ro better than he did. She had always been a serious person of high principles, the one most dedicated to following the rules. Despite her immense power, she had never once used her privileges for personal gain. But now, for Song Jingyan's sake, she had broken her own rules for the very first time. It seemed she truly cared for him, which, to be honest, was a difficult pill for Xiaoyu to swallow. And so, Song Jingyan joined the club, and Xiaoyu officially became his instructor. He took his coach's words to heart, deciding to fulfill his duty with complete professionalism. He taught with total dedication, but we see that Song Jingyan didn't appreciate being corrected. Not only did he work with a visible lack of effort, but he also invented every possible excuse to avoid training. This time, before he could even be stopped, he had already slipped away. Xiaoyu had no choice but to approach the window to call out to him. Out of the corner of his eye, he spotted Su Ban-ro, and he quickly looked away. He calmly closed the window and simply went back to his training. We see that he returned home very late that night. The first thing he saw was Su Ban-ro, standing right there at the entrance. Her expression was somber, almost impossible to read. It seemed she had been waiting for him, and he barely managed to ask what was wrong. Then came her icy question. "Xiaoyu, could you please stop picking on Jingyan? If you don't like him, just say so," she added. He was already exhausted, and hearing those words sent a whirlwind of emotions through him. He felt offended, deeply saddened, and utterly helpless. One didn't need to be a psychic to know that Song Jingyan had been gossiping and likely exaggerating. He had no idea what lies had been told, but he chose not to offer any explanations. He simply walked past her and retreated into his room. From that day on, he began to be much more flexible with Song Jingyan. Naturally, this only made Song Jingyan even more arrogant than before. Every day, he would show up at the club just to check in and do the bare minimum. Then he would leave. The others were outraged and wanted to confront him. But Xiaoyu stopped them, simply shaking his head in silence. It was Song Jingyan's life. After all, if he failed the test, they would eventually have to force him out of the club. Ultimately, the young man was responsible for his own life and his own choices. Besides, Xiaoyu felt he simply didn't have the time to keep teaching him anymore. He believed that would be the end of it, but he never imagined Su Ban-ro would suddenly come looking for him. She asked him to give up his spot in the upcoming competition to Song Jingyan. At first, he didn't even know how to react to such a request. It wasn't until she asked again if he was willing that he finally raised his head to look at her. His eyes reflected a cold, biting fury that he could no longer hide. "You're actually telling me to give my place to him?" he asked. He did everything possible to control his emotions, but he couldn't hide the slight tremble in his voice. She reminded him that, after all, the boy was his brother-in-law. Besides, she argued, it was just one spot in a single competition. Was it really that important? "Su Ban-ro, you know perfectly well what racing means to me," he replied. In that moment, Su Ban-ro's heart seemed to shrink as if something were squeezing it with immense force. It seemed she, too, had suddenly remembered those difficult early years. She remembered every single time he had trained to his absolute limit for the sake of his racing career. Her hand tightened into a fist, but in the end, she chose to say nothing more. She simply turned around and left the room in total silence. Ever since Song Jingyan joined because of Su Banru's influence, the club had slowly begun to split into two factions. One of them, led by Xiao Yu, continued to fight hard to reach their professional goals. The other faction, centered around Song Jingyan, spent their training sessions slacking off, focusing only on staying in his good graces. They hoped he would put in a good word with Su Banru, securing them more benefits in the process. For a long time, the two groups had managed to avoid a direct confrontation. Until, that is, the end of today's training session. Song Jingyan approached him, saying, "Hey, Xiao Yu, there's something I don't quite understand." He asked if Xiao Yu could teach him, which caused the racer to instinctively frown in suspicion. Just as he was about to speak, the sycophants trailing behind Song Jingyan suddenly gave him a rough shove. They demanded to know what his problem was, claiming their Jingyan was only asking for help out of kindness. Xiao Yu's friends fired back, asking what on earth had gotten into them to justify such an attitude. One of them pointed out that they wanted to know what was really going on with Song Jingyan. He had all the time in the world to ask questions during training, yet he waited until the very end. Xiao Yu suspected it was intentional, but wanting to avoid a fight, he tried to pull his friend away. The others, however, mistook this for fear. And so, they began to speak even more harshly, sensing what they thought was a moment of weakness. They laughed, mocking them for being afraid so easily. One of them bragged that their Jingyan was destined to be the future lead driver of the club. They told Xiao Yu that having Jingyan speak to him at all was a great honor. They even insulted his background as an orphan, warning him that if he upset Jingyan, he'd be kicked out for good. In the heat of the moment, someone threw the first punch, and suddenly, all order was completely lost. In an instant, the two groups became a tangled mess of swinging fists and shouting. Amidst the chaos, Song Jingyan suddenly appeared at Xiao Yu's side and gave him a violent shove. Xiao Yu was already standing right at the very edge of the platform. Just as he was about to fall, he grabbed Song Jingyan with all his might and pulled him down too. And so, we see the two of them falling together from that great height. Cries and screams broke out from every corner of the training center. The entire scene had descended into absolute, utter chaos. By the time Su Banru arrived running, they were already being rushed into the operating room. Upon seeing the two of them, Su Banru turned as pale as a sheet of paper. Her voice, which was always so calm and composed, was trembling ever so slightly. She demanded to know the situation, and was told that both Xiao Yu and Song Jingyan had fallen. Both had broken legs, but unfortunately, Song Jingyan had landed directly on top of Xiao Yu. Xiao Yu's condition was far more serious, and there was only one dose of the special fracture medication available. However, the doctor noted that Song Jingyan would recover perfectly fine even without using the medicine. But when it came to her precious Jingyan, the doctor hadn't even finished his explanation. Su Banru interrupted him immediately, her tone sharp and completely final. Hearing her so decisive, Xiao Yu, who had just woken up from the pain, felt as if he'd been struck by lightning. She knew perfectly well how vital a racer's legs are to their entire life and career. She knew it better than anyone, and the doctor had made the reality of the situation very clear. Jingyan's legs would heal without any issues even if they didn't use the special treatment. Forcing himself to endure the agony, Xiao Yu gathered his last bit of strength to crawl toward her and beg. He pleaded with her, calling her sister and begging her to give the medicine to him instead. He told her it didn't matter that she disliked him, or even that she had abandoned him on that mountain for a day and a night. But she knew perfectly well, perhaps better than anyone, just how important his legs were to him. He couldn't lose them. He still had a dream to follow, a future that depended entirely on being able to walk. He begged her with everything he had left, terrified of what he might lose forever. Beside him, Song Jingyan also began to cry, sounding utterly terrified as he called out for Banru. He cried out that his legs hurt terribly and pleaded with her to save him. Upon hearing those cries, Su Banru pulled her hand away from Xiao Yu and rushed to take Song Jingyan's hand instead. She told him to stay calm and promised she would tell the doctor to give him the special medication right away. Without a moment's further hesitation, she insisted that the doctor administer the medicine to Song Jingyan immediately. From the side, we see Xiao Yu watching the entire scene unfold in a state of shock. With great difficulty, he tried to crawl towards Song Jingyan, desperately attempting to snatch the medicine from the doctor's hand. But his broken legs were nothing more than dead weight, preventing him from moving an inch further. And so, the cold needle was pressed into Song Jingyan's legs. Xiao Yu could do nothing but watch as the special medication entered the other man's body, drop by drop. 3 days later, we find that he finally woke up from his coma. This time, he saw Su Banru sitting right there beside his hospital bed. Her face was gaunt, clearly showing the heavy toll of exhaustion and worry. As he opened his bloodshot eyes, he felt a profound sense of loss, as if his life as he knew it had ended that day. Seeing him wake up, she reached out a trembling hand to help him, but he pulled away to avoid her touch. And there, Su Banru's hand remained, suspended in the cold air of the hospital room. A long moment passed before she finally withdrew her hand. With a dry throat, she told him that his legs would be fine and that he would still be able to walk normally. The only thing was, he would never be able to return to the races again. But she told him not to worry, promising to take care of him, as Jingyan was her fiancé. She felt she couldn't abandon him or leave him to his fate, believing he should live a normal life like anyone else. At that moment, he was supposed to be feeling a whirlwind of emotions. Fury, despair, sadness, and an overwhelming sense of pain. He felt as though he should have been screaming with every bit of strength he had left. But all those emotions simply piled up in his chest until, in the end, only a helpless void remained. He quietly asked her to leave, and a long, heavy silence flooded the room. Finally, Su Banru stood up from her seat. She told him to get some rest, and then left the room in total silence. The very instant the door clicked shut, he finally dared to look down at his mangled legs. And there, he broke down into uncontrollable tears, watching his dream of being a racing driver turn to ash. From the day the doctor told him he could never compete again, he became little more than a ghost of his former self. He no longer cried or laughed. He just sat in a chair staring out the window with a lost, empty gaze. That continued until the day of the big race arrived, when, ignoring the Su family's attempts to stop him, he went anyway. He took a seat quietly in the very last row of the stands. As he looked toward the track, we see him watching Song Jingyan occupying the place that should have been his. The man was receiving the applause and the flowers that, in another life, were meant for him. When the race finally came to an end, we see Su Banru stepping up with a bouquet of flowers to congratulate him. Everyone crowded around to offer their best wishes to Song Jingyan. He remained there, sitting in his seat in total silence, watching from afar. He watched the people coming and going until, eventually, the stands were empty and everyone had left. He wasn't sure how much time had passed, but at last, he forced himself to stand up. As he approached, Su Banru instinctively stepped between him and Song Jingyan, as if shielding the winner. She told him that if he was angry, he should take it out on her instead. She begged him not to hurt Song Jingyan, but he simply replied that he wasn't angry at all. He told them he had only come to give them a gift, a statement that left them both frozen for a moment. He asked them to follow him, and with that, he led the way out of the racetrack. Just as they stepped outside, a firework streaked across the sky and exploded in a sudden burst of light. The lights fell like a rain of petals, and one after another, more fireworks began to illuminate the night sky. A flicker of unease crossed Su Banru's eyes as she watched the display. In the next second, she heard him softly call out her name, Su Banru. He asked her if she remembered the day he won his very first race. Back then, she had set off fireworks across the entire sky just to celebrate his victory. She had told him she wanted his life to shine with its own light and for him to be as free as the wind. And so, he told her he was returning those fireworks to her today. He wished her and his future brother-in-law a long life together, filled with love and a happy old age. The moment he used the word brother-in-law, Su Banru's pupils contracted as she looked at him in pure shock. It was the very first time he had ever called Song Jingyan his brother-in-law in public. The words hit home, and he felt a sharp, sudden pang in his chest. Just as he was about to speak, our protagonist simply turned around and walked away. We move to the eve of the wedding, where the Su family home is a chaotic whirlwind of preparations. Late into the night, the lights on the ground floor remain stubbornly bright. Su Mu is busy directing the servants as they decorate the house with everything needed for the ceremony. Upstairs, in his room, a single lamp is also burning through the dark. He is sitting on the rug, slowly packing every gift Su Banru gave him over the years into a large box. He tucks these memories away one by one, and then, clutching the box tightly, he begins to descend the stairs slowly through the silence of the night. The entire house is filled with new things, all ready for the big day. Every corner serves as a silent, perhaps even painful, reminder. A reminder that this house is about to welcome a brand new mistress. Without a backward glance, he heads out with the box, bumping right into Su Banru as she returns from the Song house. She asks what he's doing, and he simply tells her he's throwing away things he no longer needs. Watching his back, which showed not a single trace of nostalgia, she felt an inexplicable tightness in her heart. Ever since that incident, he had become like a completely different person. He could no longer race cars, a fact that changed everything. She had expected him to scream and cause a scene, but instead, he remained perfectly still. In fact, he possessed a level of calm that was, to be honest, a little frightening. He turned around to look at her, and a second later, he heard her say that Jingyan was hoping he would be the best man at the wedding. He is my brother-in-law now, he told her, not my friend. It simply isn't appropriate for someone like me, the younger brother, to do something like that. He suggested they find someone else, and after saying that, he stopped looking at her and walked away, step by step. The truth wasn't that it was inappropriate, but rather that on the day of the wedding, he was planning to leave for good. We move to the night before the wedding, where, clutching a box in his hands, he goes to find his adoptive parents. Dad, Mom, I won't be able to attend my sister's wedding tomorrow, he says calmly. He explains that his biological parents have bought him a plane ticket, and the flight is scheduled for tomorrow morning. I'm leaving tomorrow, he tells them, leaving them to wonder why it has to be so sudden. It isn't sudden, he replies, as deep down he knows he should have left a long time ago. Inside this box, he explains, is all the money he has managed to save over all these years. The amount is exactly what is needed to pay back everything the Su family spent on him during these 15 years. He simply shakes his head, offering them a small, sad smile. He pulls a stack of thick envelopes from his pocket and hands them over, which is quite a significant gesture. His adoptive parents shake their heads repeatedly, trying to push the money back into his hands. But he refuses firmly, asking them to please accept it as his final contribution. Afterward, he kneels on the floor and, with great solemnity, performs 3 deep bows before them, touching his forehead to the ground. "Dad, Mom, thank you for your care and attention during these 15 years, he says with genuine gratitude. He tells them that their kindness in raising him is something he will never forget for the rest of his life. And with that, he makes it clear that from now on, he will no longer be by their side. "I hope you enjoy good health and have a long, happy life," he tells them, offering a final blessing. "Thank you," his father replies. On the day of the wedding, Monroe was supposed to be on her way to the ceremony, but she wasn't moving. On the contrary, she couldn't stop pacing back and forth right in front of his bedroom door. As she stared at that closed door, Monroe felt a sudden, sharp pang in her heart. She had the overwhelming sensation that she simply couldn't bring herself to leave just yet. What if she left now? She felt as though she would lose something incredibly important forever. "Sister, is something wrong?" he asks, finally noticing her presence there. He opened the door and found Monroe standing right there, directly in front of his room. The sheer distance and coldness in his gaze caused her heart to skip another beat. "Why don't you come with me?" she asks. Go with her? He wonders why she would even suggest it. And for what on earth? To watch her and Song Jinyuan flaunt their love for one another? Instinctively, he glanced down at the watch on his wrist to check the time. "I don't have time for that," he says, as he still has something else he needs to attend to. "I'll see you directly at the wedding venue in a little while," he adds, keeping his tone neutral. Monroe was about to say something more, but downstairs, Su Mu was already rushing her to hurry up. Monroe was running out of time. On one hand, she was faced with his firm refusal, and on the other, there was the constant pressure from her uncle, Su Mu, to get moving. Even so, Monroe seemed strangely reluctant to leave his side at that moment. It wasn't until the shouts to hurry grew louder that she had to suppress the rising panic in her heart. "Before the wedding starts, come and find me," she tells him, hoping he will actually show up. "I have something to tell you," she says, but he says nothing, simply looking down with total indifference. However, Monroe seemed to insist on an answer, repeating her important words once more. "You have to come and find me," she demands, and seeing she won't leave without a response, he felt he had no choice but to lie and give her a small nod. "Fine, I understand," he says, and with that, Monroe finally seemed to find some peace of mind. Only then did she remove her hand from the doorframe and turn around to leave. He watched from above as she walked down the stairs and climbed into the wedding car. One by one, everyone else piled into the cars following close behind her. And finally, the celebratory fireworks began to echo through the air. The bridal car began to pull away, growing smaller and smaller before his eyes. He watched until, at last, it disappeared from his sight completely. "Have a happy wedding, Monroe," he whispers, "and goodbye forever." After saying that, he took his packed suitcase, walked downstairs, and headed toward the airport, step by step. His silhouette moved away with quiet determination, without looking back even a single time. We see that the wedding between the Sun and Su families was the biggest news in Hinching. Enormous crowds of people had come out since early that morning. They waited along the roadside, hoping the Su family would toss gifts to the onlookers as they passed. Congratulations were heard one after another, yet inside the car, Monroe, for some strange reason, couldn't feel happy. She remembered the look in her brother's eyes when he stood before his bedroom door. And just like that, her heart began to race with that same uneasy feeling once again. She couldn't shake the nagging feeling that she was overlooking something important. Because the Su family held a higher status than the Sun family, Monroe had come personally to collect the groom. To be honest, the Su family didn't care much for ancient traditions or formalities. They simply wanted the world to know that it was a blessing for the Sun family that Monroe was marrying Song Hing Nian. They wanted to emphasize that their daughter was marrying him, and that their son was also marrying into a family of lower status. It was a way of showing they weren't trying to climb the social ladder through an arranged marriage between wealthy elites. We see that the Sun family home was also lavishly decorated with lights and vibrant colors. The entire estate was draped in festive silk ribbons for the occasion. Several of Song Hing Nian's groomsmen stood out on the balcony, watching for the Su family's wedding car to arrive. Finally, the clock struck 11, and the bells began to chime. The Su family's wedding procession set off, and their lead car slowly began to appear in the distance. Filled with excitement, the young men rushed over to tell Song Hing Nian the news. They're coming. Miss Su has finally arrived." After a period of music and celebration, Monroe finally made her way to the second floor, clutching her bridal bouquet. She reached the door and stepped into Song Hing Nian's room. Seeing Monroe standing before him in her wedding dress, Song Hing Nian couldn't help but feel a surge of emotion. At long last, he was actually going to marry his beloved Monroe. Following a series of traditional games and jokes, Monroe and Song Hing Nian finally climbed into the wedding car together. And so, the procession began its journey toward the reception venue. During the entire ride, Song Hing Nian simply couldn't take his eyes off Monroe. He wasn't sure if it was just his imagination, but he felt that from the moment she arrived until now, Monroe had been distracted the entire time. He reached out and gave her dress a gentle little tug to get her attention. "Monroe, what's wrong?" he asked, sensing that something was weighing on her mind. "Is something bothering you? You don't exactly look happy." She told him that the nerves of knowing they were getting married had kept her awake all night long. With that explanation, Song Hing-yen stopped overthinking the matter and gently pulled her into his arms. A little later, the wedding car came to a halt in front of the reception venue. We see the couple enter a private lounge to rest for a moment before the festivities began. After they had talked for a while, Monroe finally stood up and stepped out of the room. Remembering what had been said that morning, she quickly called for the butler. She asked him to go find Xiao Yu, but as she waited for him to arrive, she suddenly felt a deep sense of confusion. She wanted to tell him that, from now on, Song Hing-yen would be his brother-in-law. She told herself that no matter what she was thinking, she mustn't show it in front of her new husband. After Song Hing-yen moved into the Su family home, Xiao Yu would still be able to live there. He wouldn't have to move out. To him, she would always be his older sister. She had thought of so many things she wanted to say to him. She had even rehearsed how to start the conversation the moment she saw him. But when she saw the butler returning completely alone, her prepared words turned into sudden panic. "And Xiao Yu?" she asked, while the butler opened his mouth, unsure of how to respond. As it turned out, when she had sent him to find the boy, he had run straight into Mr. and Mrs. Su coming up the stairs. Upon hearing the reason for his visit, Mr. and Mrs. Su exchanged a knowing look. They calculated that Xiao Yu was likely already on the plane, and with the wedding about to begin, timing was tight. If Monroe were to go looking for him now, she would undoubtedly discover that something was terribly wrong. Fearing a delay to the ceremony, they instructed the butler to tell Monroe a lie. They told her that his old leg injury had flared up again, forcing him to return home to rest. To make the deception more convincing, they even produced a note he had written previously but had never shown her. It was in his own handwriting, stating that he wasn't feeling well, which, in a sense, was true enough. The butler could hardly believe they were going through with this, but he had his orders. Monroe took the note, her brow furrowing as she scanned the familiar script. She felt that something didn't quite add up, but just as she was about to speak, the announcement came. The wedding was starting. Monroe, who had been on the verge of investigating further, hesitated for a moment before turning toward the ceremony hall. The butler watched her walk away, letting out a long, silent sigh of relief. And then, the soft, elegant notes of the piano began to fill the air. Monroe looked toward Song Hing-yen waiting at the end of the altar and began her slow walk toward him. Song Hing-yen had a smile on his face that he simply couldn't hide. He was truly happy. But, for some strange reason, her mind suddenly drifted to how Xiao Yu would look in a wedding suit. He had always been the mischievous type. He probably wouldn't wear a traditional suit, opting for black and gold instead. He wouldn't wait for her to approach either, like Song Hing-yen was doing, but would walk toward her with a light, confident step. On his face, there wouldn't be a shy smile, but a wide, bold grin that told her everything would be all right. And then, in her imagination, he would reach out and pull her close with genuine affection. Perhaps she was simply too lost in her own fantasy, because when the master of ceremonies asked if she took the man before her to be her husband, she, quite unconsciously, spoke my name. And to make matters worse, she still had the microphone in her hand. Our scene turns awkward as the sound system carried her voice, loud and clear, through the entire hall. The guests, at first, were left in a state of absolute shock. Then, the whispers began to ripple through the crowd. Xiao Yu? Isn't he the Su family's protege? Why on earth would Miss Su say Xiao Yu's name at a time like this? The parents of both families, seated in the front row, suddenly looked very grave indeed. Mr. and Mrs. Su looked at her instinctively, feeling a wave of growing anxiety wash over them. How could their daughter possibly make such a mistake at such a crucial moment? As for the Song family, their faces darkened with immediate disapproval. They turned at once, silently demanding an explanation from the Su parents. At the altar, hearing his Banru call out my name, Song Hing-yen turned pale and gripped the fabric of his trousers tightly. With a trembling voice, he asked, "Banru, what are you saying?" Instinctively, he reached out, trying to take his Banru's hand to steady the moment. They were only one step away from the most important part, becoming husband and wife. Why did she have to say Xiao Yu's name now? To be honest, the timing couldn't have been worse. In any other situation, Monroe would have read the room and reacted immediately to fix her mistake. She would have laughed it off or downplayed the incident with her usual grace. But now, she just stood there, staring blankly at the guests as if she were somewhere else entirely. Some faces were strangers, others were familiar, but among them all, the person she was searching for was nowhere to be found. In the very next moment, ignoring the cries of the crowd, she ran straight down from the altar. She raced toward the exit while countless voices shouted her name. Some called out in anger, others in sadness or despair, but even so, she didn't look back once. As she fled the wedding venue, Song Jingyan instinctively tried to follow her. But suddenly, everything went black for him, and he collapsed right there on the floor. And so, our scene dissolved into total and utter chaos. Su Banru climbed into her car, slammed her foot on the accelerator, and drove directly toward the Su family home. She remembered the look in his eyes that morning and the yellowed note the butler had given her. She also recalled the heavy sense of guilt she had seen in the butler's eyes. A terrible, sinking feeling began to take hold of her. Her heart racing, she brought the car to a screeching halt right in front of the Sioux residence. She didn't even wait for the vehicle to stop completely before running toward the villa. She cleared the 2 flights of stairs in just a few desperate leaps. She reached the door to his room and threw it open with a single, frantic push. There was no one inside. In fact, every single one of his belongings had vanished. At that sight, Sue Banru's face tightened with a sudden, sharp anxiety. She grabbed one of the maids who happened to be passing by. "Where is my brother?" she demanded, as a heavy weight settled deep in her chest. That feeling only grew stronger. She pushed the maid aside and prepared to go racing back downstairs. Just then, she ran straight into Su Fu, who was returning in a state of absolute fury. He shouted for her to stop, and though Sue Banru struggled to break free in a moment of pure carelessness, she slipped and tumbled down the stairs, a sight so shocking that Su Fu closed his eyes, nearly fainting. As she lay there, we can only imagine her thoughts. This was supposed to be a day of grand celebration. Who could have possibly predicted that such a scandal would unfold instead? The Su family rushed Sue Banru to the hospital in a desperate hurry. It was there, quite unexpectedly, that the doctor informed them she was already 1 month pregnant. Upon hearing the news, the entire Sun family gathered happily in Sue Banru's hospital room. They had assumed the marriage alliance was completely ruined, but they hadn't counted on this twist of fate. Sue Banru was carrying a child of the Sun family, after all. They presumed that, with this development, she would no longer be able to escape her obligations. And the happiest person in the room, naturally, was Sun Hing-yen. He never imagined that heaven would be so kind to him. To be blessed with a child at such a critical moment seemed like a miracle to him. When Sue Banru finally woke up, she found herself surrounded by everyone. They watched over her, as if she were a precious object that required constant protection. They told her plainly, "Banru, you are pregnant now." They insisted she couldn't take risks and demanded she apologize to Hing-yen the moment she was stable. Her attempt to flee had been useless. Her disappearance from the wedding had already made her the talk of the town. But how could Sue Banru accept this? She needed to find me, to know where I had gone, so she forced herself up. She was ready to go out and look for him, but Su Fu wasn't about to give her that chance. With a sharp gesture, he ordered his men to stop her. She didn't let them catch her easily, which infuriated Su Fu so much he nearly fell backward, shouting, "Disobedient daughter, what on earth are you doing? You're pregnant now. How can you think of running around? Where did Xiao Yu go?" she asked, her eyes red and her voice filled with a desperate plea. Remembering what the maid had said, Sue Banru's heart beat faster and faster. "Why do you ask that? The most important thing for you now is to come with me and apologize to the Sun family." Seeing that her uncle wouldn't tell her anything, Sue Banru tried to push past him. "Catch her." A crowd of people lunged at her, dragging her by force to stand before Sun Hing-yen. "Do you even know what day it is? Do you realize you ran away from your own wedding? Where does this leave the Sun and Sue families? If you didn't want to marry my son, you should have said so directly. Why humiliate us? With this snub right now, how is my son supposed to show his face after this?" Sue Banru clenched her fists tightly, biting her lip in silence. At that very moment, the door to the room opened from the inside, and we see the tension in the air reach its breaking point. Sun Hing-yen stood there with a pale face, his eyes squeezed shut as if trying to block out the reality of the situation. The mother of the family turned her attention to him, then hurried after her daughter to see what was truly going on. "Why did you run away just to look for Xiao Yu?" she demanded, searching for an answer that made any sense. Recalling her daughter's strange behavior throughout the day, an impossible idea began to take root in her mind. Sue Banru clenched her fists even tighter. For a long moment, she simply didn't know what to say. To be honest, there were no easy words left. How could she possibly explain it? Initially, she had sought him out just to tell him to view Sun Hing-yen as his brother-in-law from now on. But when she learned he had left without saying goodbye, a cold panic had seized her heart, overriding everything else. She wanted to find him, but then, she found herself flooded with memories of him, happy, sad, heartbroken, flashing through her mind. She also couldn't stop thinking about that expression of pure relief he had worn just this morning. Slowly, those images merged into a single, sharp memory. The day she had discovered his secret diary. The memory of when he gathered all his courage to confess, saying, "Sister, I like you," which, as we know, changed everything. A sharp ringing filled her ears, drowning out everything else. Instinctively, she pressed her hand against her heart, as if trying to steady it. "Did you go looking for Xiao Yu? Was it because you suddenly realized you actually like him?" After all, one gains a certain level of experience in life over the years. Seeing her daughter in such a state, that impossible idea quickly transformed into a certainty. At any other time, Sue Banru would have denied it instantly, and quite convincingly too. But today, not seeing Xiao Yu at the wedding or finding him at home triggered a panic that drove her to search for him immediately. That feeling she had buried deep within her soul so long ago had sprouted again, growing into a giant tree. "He is your brother. How could you even have those kinds of thoughts?" The very same words that had once been used against Xiao Yu were now being turned on her. How had Xiaoyu felt back then? It was a question she never asked in the past, yet here her mother was, repeating those words 3 years later. A profound, heavy sadness began to flood her heart. In that exact moment, she finally understood just how painful those words could truly be. It was just a crush, a secret love, nothing more, or so she told herself. She hadn't even opened her mouth to say it out loud yet. Even if you do like him, it doesn't matter anymore, her mother continued coldly. Xiaoyu has already gone abroad to search for his biological parents, and he has no intention of ever coming back, which, naturally, was the hardest blow of all. Xiaoyu found his parents? Why didn't anyone tell me? Why did you hide it from me? Do you really not remember what you did? Su Banru's face turned deathly pale as she began to remember everything that had happened over this past month. To make Song Hing Nian happy, she had torn down the wish ribbons that Xiaoyu had carefully hung up. She had abandoned him in the middle of nowhere and even gave his only special medicine to Song Hing Nian, ensuring Xiaoyu could never race cars again. We see her face growing whiter by the second as the weight of her actions finally begins to sink in. She was terrified that he would never get another chance to race. Her legs trembled, and she was on the verge of collapsing to the floor. Everything around her started to blur, the world spinning out of her control. She could hear nothing but the chaotic thumping of her own heart and her ragged, heavy breathing. I don't care what you were thinking before, her mother said, dismissive of her daughter's internal turmoil. You are already married to Hing Nian now, she reminded her, as if a piece of paper could change her heart. And you're going to be a mother, so forget those ideas and focus on living your life with him. Even though Su Banru had run away mid-wedding, both families simply took it for granted that Song Hing Nian was now the Su family's son-in-law. Su Banru opened her mouth, desperately trying to find the words to explain herself. But suddenly, everything went black, and she fell unconscious to the ground. When she finally woke up, she found Song Hing Nian sitting right there by her side. He was crying uncontrollably, as the events of the day had dealt him a truly devastating blow. After all, the most important moment in a person's life is supposed to be their wedding day. But the person he loved had abandoned him at the altar for someone else, which is a hard thing for anyone to endure. How could he possibly show his face in public after such a public humiliation? To make matters worse, she had fainted at the wedding, and it was then discovered that Su Banru was pregnant. The doctor had just informed him that, due to the severe emotional shock she suffered, there was a real chance she might lose the baby. As he thought about all of this, he began to cry even more bitterly. And deep down, in the quiet corners of his heart, a deep resentment towards Xiaoyu began to grow. Since they were children, he had never been able to surpass him in anything, not even once. Even though the Song and Su families held similar status, his parents had always coveted the Su family's influence. They constantly forced him to flatter Xiaoyu, hoping to squeeze some benefit out of the Su family. To make matters worse, everything in the Song family was already destined for his younger brother. He had nothing of his own, and even his future wife was expected to be someone who could benefit his brother's future. Initially, his parents had chosen a divorced millionaire with a terrible temperament for him to marry. It was only because he caused a monumental scene that his parents finally decided to back down. To end his parents' schemes once and for all, he felt he had no choice but to find his own solution. And as it happened, Xiaoyu had secretly confessed to him that he had feelings for Su Banru. He knew perfectly well, of course, that Xiaoyu was only the adopted son of the Su family. To outsiders, there was nothing strange about their bond, so he went straight to Su Banru and told her everything. At first, he only wanted to destroy Xiaoyu's dreams of social climbing, but he never imagined what would happen next. He didn't expect that Su Banru, wanting Xiaoyu to give up on her for good, would ask for his help. He, naturally, wasn't about to let such a golden opportunity slip through his fingers. After all, compared to the candidate his parents had chosen, Su Banru was a catch in every sense of the word. So, he would put on a show in front of her, whining and pretending to be deeply concerned for her well-being. Su Banru couldn't resist and fell into his trap time and time again, until they finally reached the altar. But who could have guessed that Su Banru would end up abandoning him when it mattered most? Without a doubt, it was a terrible humiliation for him. His parents also blamed him, criticizing his lack of ability to keep Su Banru by his side. But in front of the Su family, they played the victims so the Sus would feel even more guilty. In the past, Su Banru certainly would have hugged him and comforted him with affection. But now, we see her simply staring at the ceiling with a lost, distant gaze. This scene only served to irritate Song Hing Nian even further. He knew, of course, that they only started dating because Su Banru wanted to use him to make Xiaoyu jealous. It was all a ploy to make Xiaoyu give up and stay away from her forever. But now, she had given him everything. They had even married. And yet, despite all that, her thoughts were still fixed on Xiaoyu. Su Banru looked at him coldly. He turned pale and tried to speak, but she shifted her gaze to her own womb. The doctor had just informed her that she was 1 month pregnant. Song Hing Nian had always taken precautions, except for that one time after their car went over the ravine. In her rush to comfort him back then, she hadn't taken any measures. It was only that once. She told herself that if Xiaoyu hadn't left, perhaps having this baby wouldn't be so bad. But now that he was gone, she felt this child no longer had a reason to exist. To her, both Song Hing Nian and this baby were nothing more than tools to make Xiaoyu surrender. Furthermore, now that she had confirmed her true feelings, she felt she had even less reason to keep the child. I'm going to abort the child. Those 5 words made Song Jing-Yin bolt upright in shock. But before he could say a word, Sue's father and mother suddenly burst into the room. Sue's father gave Su Banru a harsh scolding and then, quite suddenly, closed his eyes and fainted. Meanwhile, we see that the people sent by Xiao Yu's parents had picked him up and taken him to the United States. He immediately spotted his biological parents standing on the corner with a bouquet of flowers, looking around nervously. He looks very much like his mother, and this was their first reunion in 15 long years. The 3 of them embraced tightly, weeping inconsolably in the middle of the street. His mother tried to dry her tears, but every time she looked at him, she began to cry all over again. Once they arrived home, she refused to let go of his hand for even a single second. She didn't want to lose him again, telling him that she and his father had named him Sinshin. He told her not to worry, speaking with a calm he hadn't felt in years. He asked her to simply call him Sinshin, as he had finally severed all ties with the Su family. He was no longer one of them, and naturally, he intended to use his biological parents' surname from now on. His mother felt deeply moved by this gesture, her heart full of a sudden, overwhelming joy. But then, her gaze shifted downward toward his legs. She asked Sinshin if, now that he was in America, he wanted to continue racing cars. She even offered to contact a racing club immediately if that was what he truly desired. Sinshin froze, staring fixedly at his legs as the weight of the question settled over him. Suddenly, his eyes reddened and tears began to fall, one after another, in a silent stream. Seeing him cry like that in the middle of the room, his mother felt a sharp pang of regret. She quickly told him that if he didn't want to race, they wouldn't do it, trying to comfort him. But Sinshin looked at her and explained that it wasn't a matter of no longer wanting to race. He explained how Song Jingyan had pushed him off the platform and how Su Banru had given that special medicine to Song Jingyan. He told her absolutely everything, but when he reached the part where the doctor said he could never race again, he fell silent. Calling him the light of her life, his mother pulled him into her arms as he finally broke down, weeping uncontrollably. It seemed that despite all the time that had passed, the wound was still fresh. As he remembered that day, he found he still couldn't truly accept the reality of his situation. His mother was left both furious and utterly heartbroken by the revelation. She comforted him for a long while, and only after seeing him fall asleep did she tiptoe out to make a call to China. She reached out to an old contact, Mr. Meng, telling him she needed his help with a certain matter. Meanwhile, we see that ever since Su Banru had become pregnant, things had changed. Song Jingyan had moved into the Su household, where he looked after Su Banru with truly incredible dedication. He gave her everything she asked for, ensuring that the dishes for her 3 daily meals were never repeated. Under the constant care of the Su family and Song Jingyan, Su Banru's face had grown noticeably fuller. The only issue was that, although they had held a wedding ceremony, they hadn't legally registered the marriage yet. Today was Su Mu's birthday, and though Su Banru didn't want to go, she had to return home, only to find no party waiting for her. On the contrary, everyone was crowded together, pointing fingers and whispering amongst themselves. She felt a knot tighten in her stomach as she pushed through the crowd to see what was happening. And there she saw Su Mu, trying desperately to stop the police from taking Song Jingyan away. By asking around, she learned the truth. Song Jingyan had intentionally pushed Sinshin off the platform. It turns out that Sinshin had always recorded his training sessions with a camera. After the police took Song Jingyan, it was revealed he used those videos to analyze his performance, and they had captured everything. On that day, just before the argument with Song Jingyan, Sinshan was about to turn off the camera when, out of nowhere, he was pushed. Everything was captured on video, but even if it hadn't been, many people saw the incident with their own eyes. In fact, his friends wanted to call the police immediately, but the club directors stopped them because of Su Banru's high status. They were forbidden from reporting it, at least until today, when a certain phone call arrived from the United States. It was only then that the entire matter finally came back to light. At the same time, we see it was also revealed that Su Banru had been the one to give that special medicine to Song Jingyan. This sudden series of scandals completely ruined the Su family's reputation, leaving them in utter disgrace. The police chief was at a total loss, not knowing how to handle the mounting pressure. Just at that moment, a car horn blared from behind the crowd, and everyone turned to see who had arrived. A middle-aged man with a very stern expression stepped out and walked directly towards Su Banru. Without a word, the man pulled out a special warrant. To be honest, he didn't look like the type to negotiate. He informed Su Banru that she was now a suspect in a conspiracy to frame another person. He told her she had to come with them and, without waiting for a reply, signaled to his men. Several of them lunged forward, grabbing her and forcing her into the car against her will. Seeing this, Su Mu screamed and tried to stop them, but Su Fu realized the danger and held her back. It was clear that this man's rank was far higher than Su Banru's, making resistance quite useless. The man remained silent, and the family realized it simply wasn't in their best interest to cross him. Meanwhile, the local police no longer hesitated now that the situation had escalated. They grabbed Song Jingyan and hauled him into the patrol car, ending his short-lived comfort. Little by little, the crowd began to disperse, leaving behind nothing but a family in absolute shambles. Sumu felt her strength completely abandon her, and she collapsed right there on the ground. Su Fu rushed over to help her up, but her vision blurred, and she fainted away entirely. In the dim light of the interrogation room, we see the middle-aged man sitting across from Su Banru, holding a single sheet of paper. One by one, he began to read her crimes aloud. The more Su Banru listened, the more familiar the details started to sound to her. Deep down, she realized these were the exact same things she had once done to Xiaoyu. She had once asked Lo Su about the identity of Xiaoyu's biological parents, but they had always avoided the subject, as if they were terrified. When the man mentioned that she had given the special medication to Song Jingyan, the weight of the situation finally hit her. As he detailed how she had harmed Xiaoyu, the son of Ambassador Xia, and ensured he could never be a racing pilot again, it was finally confirmed that the ambassador's son was none other than Xiaoyu himself. Agitated, she tried to stand up to confirm this news with the man, but the guards behind her held her down firmly. The man simply looked at her with a cold gaze and announced her punishment. Meanwhile, Song Jingyan's situation was turning out to be even more dire than Su Banru's. During the investigation, it was discovered that he had intentionally harmed people on more than one occasion. Aside from Xiaoyu, several others who had the misfortune of crossing him had also become his victims. The Song family was powerful enough to protect him, but he had committed too many crimes and, more importantly, targeted the wrong person. And so, quite simply, they decided it was time to stop helping him. In the end, the Song family paid the victims a substantial amount of money just to put the matter to rest. Furious at the disgrace, the family took out all their pent-up anger on Song Jingyan. They severed all ties with him, leaving him to face his fate entirely on his own. In the end, it was Su Mu who ended up taking him back to her house. Before all of this, we should remember that Su Mu actually liked Song Jingyan quite a bit. To her, he seemed like a gentle and sensible boy, someone capable of making her cold daughter smile. Every time he visited, the house seemed to brighten up instantly. Su Mu's home was filled with laughter, but now, after learning of his many crimes, she couldn't even stand the sight of him. Just looking at him gave her a headache, so she sent Song Jingyan to an adjacent house with a couple of maids to watch over him. She also made sure to give those maids a very clear warning. Keeping him alive is enough, she told them, and instructed them not to get involved in anything else. Not long ago, Song Jingyan was the envy of everyone he knew. But overnight, he fell from grace in the most spectacular fashion. He had become the villain of the story, and naturally, everyone began to avoid him like the plague. He threw tantrums and refused to accept his new reality, which was to be expected. However, the maid Su Mu sent didn't care in the slightest about his childish outbursts. They advised him to start getting used to his new situation sooner rather than later. If it weren't for the fact that the young lady is carrying your child, they told him, the Su family wouldn't care about you at all. Song Jingyan also began to think about the baby in Su Banru's womb. The child she was carrying, that thought alone finally made him calm down. After settling into the house, he realized that, above all else, he now had absolutely nothing left to his name. The baby was his only support, and he had to ensure Su Banru gave birth to that child without any issues. As he thought about this, he finally stopped struggling against his fate. He quietly finished the rest of the rice soup in his bowl, suddenly quite docile. Meanwhile, in the room below, Su Banru had collapsed weakly onto the floor, knowing her demotion meant she might never return to the team. She sat there with her legs sprawled out carelessly, looking completely defeated. Her hands hung limp at her sides, and the spark that once defined her eyes had vanished. They had turned dull and vacant, but then a maid arrived, placing a large box directly in front of her. The maid explained that these were the items returned from the recycling center. Apparently, these were the things the young master had thrown away. Because the items were considered far too valuable, the workers hadn't dared to dispose of them, and so they returned them exactly as they had found them. Upon hearing that these were the things he had discarded, Su Banru's dull eyes suddenly lit up with life. She remembered how, after she left, everything in her room had been tossed out, including their family portrait. She had searched every corner of the house, but she couldn't find a single thing that reminded her of him. Su Banru lunged for the box, perhaps forgetting how long she had been sitting still. She didn't realize her own strength, and the cardboard box tore wide open. Everything stored inside spilled out across the floor in a messy heap. As she saw clearly what lay before her, her eyes widened in complete shock. Inside were all the objects and every single gift he had ever given her. The teddy bear she now held was the very first welcome gift she received when she arrived at the Su house. Back then, she used to spend entire nights awake, paralyzed by fear. It was Su Banru who would sneak into the room and, clutching that bear, tell her a bedtime story to calm her nerves. He even told her that the bear was a piece of him, promised to protect her in his place. The leather shoes sitting nearby were the very first birthday gift Su Banru had ever given her. He had them specially made for her abroad, a gesture that, at the time, meant everything. The other boxes contained every single birthday gift he had presented to her, year after year. On her birthday, as soon as the clock struck midnight, he would appear with a prepared gift and leave it at her door. He never missed a single year, at least until she turned 18, and he discovered the diary where she kept her true feelings. From that moment on, he never gave her another gift again. We see Su Banru looking at them one by one, her gaze lingering on the remnants of their past. The pain in her eyes grew more intense with every object she touched. She realized he had kept all these gifts in perfect condition over the years. If it weren't for the slight yellowing marks of time, anyone would have thought they were brand new. She reached out with trembling hands, stroking the gifts gently, one by one. Suddenly, as if spotting something hidden, she pulled a diary from the very bottom of the box. Seeing the layers of adhesive tape covering it, she knew exactly what it was, the diary he had once torn to pieces. The boy who had always loved calling her sister had suddenly started using her full name. She had assumed it was simply because he was growing up and had his own life, so she didn't give it much thought. That was until Sun Jinyan pulled her aside in secret and told her the truth about his feelings. It was only then that she learned he had been in love with her for a very long time. In that moment, her initial reaction was one of pure shock. And slowly, that shock began to turn into something much colder, like falling snow. She had shared her most intimate secrets with Sun Jinyan, trusting him completely. And Sun Jinyan, as it turned out, had never been particularly good at keeping secrets. If he ever revealed the truth, it wouldn't just be the two of them. The entire Su family would suffer a devastating blow. That was why, before any of this could come to light, she was already thinking of how to crush his feelings at the root. He didn't even know how she had burst into his room, or how she had managed to tear his diary into 1,000 pieces. When he finally came to his senses, he saw her face, shattered and bathed in tears. In that moment, to be perfectly honest, she truly panicked. But as she thought back to the contents of those pages, that panic quickly curdled into anger. She told him that from the very first day he arrived at the Su house, she had only ever seen him as a younger brother. How could he possibly start feeling something like that for her? She warned him that if he still wanted to stay in that house, he had better keep those feelings to himself. Otherwise, a massive scandal would break out, ruining everything. The entire world would find out, and there would be no hiding from it. Did he really want to make a mockery of the Su family name? We see her hand gently caressing that same mangled diary now. She could perfectly imagine how, after she had left the room, he must have cried until he collapsed. And then, exhausted from weeping, he had used adhesive tape to piece back together, bit by bit, the diary she had destroyed. Perhaps due to the immense sorrow of that night, the pages still bore the wrinkles left by tears as they dried. The tears had blurred the ink, making many of the words unreadable, but the emotion remained palpable. It was a testament to the profound love he had once felt for her. That was why, after everything that had happened, he didn't give up quite so easily. He tried to win her back over and over again, but she simply couldn't accept it. The mere thought of Mr. and Mrs. Su rejecting him again was enough to make him suffer. So, to completely extinguish whatever feelings he still had for her, she decided to find someone to help her put on a little show. When he heard about her plan, Song Jing Nian stepped forward and volunteered to play the part. Looking at Song Jing Nian's fragile frame, he felt a sharp sting of both pain and relief. But later on, he would discover that every single detail had been part of Song Jing Nian's calculated plan. From that point forward, everything began to flow as smooth as silk. He and Song Jing Nian grew closer and closer with each passing day. And slowly, the love for him that used to shine in her eyes began to fade away. There was the first time he stayed out all night because of Song Jing Nian, and then the moment he took Song Jing Nian's hand to announce their engagement. When he held Song Jing Nian's hand to announce their wedding, the love in her eyes vanished completely, leaving only a cold distance. That coldness was the only thing left of her feelings for him after her heart had finally shattered. And though he felt so relieved back then that she had stopped loving him, now, just as he realized his own belated love for her, he felt an unbearable ache, and a profound sadness seemed to flood the entire room. Clutching the diary to his chest, he broke down and began to weep bitterly. We move now to Hinching Airport, where, after half a year, she was finally setting foot on this land once again. When she left for the United States, she thought she'd never return, but life is full of surprises, and here she was after only 6 months. This time, she had come as her mother's representative to attend the NCI birthday banquet. Her mother couldn't make the trip due to work commitments, so she had asked her to come in her stead. To ensure her safety, her mother specifically asked her cousin to accompany her on the trip. Even though she had only been gone for half a year, seeing such great love for her made her feel quite sad. Looking at everything before her, she felt as if an entire lifetime had passed since she last stood there. Beside her, Xia Jiaqing couldn't stop marveling at his surroundings. He had grown up in the United States, so this was, in fact, his very first time visiting the country. Before their return, her mother called another of her dear friends here to ask them to look after the pair. And so, upon leaving the airport, they didn't head to a hotel. Instead, the Zhu family picked them up directly. The Zhu family home is located in the south of Hinching, in an area nestled within the city. Their house is quite close to the residence where her mother used to live. In that very neighborhood was the place she once called home. As we see her looking at those familiar streets, she felt a momentary sense of disorientation. She had traveled this particular road countless times before. When she was only 6 years old, the Zhu family had brought her home along this very path. She always took this route. When she was 15, because training ended so late, Su Banru would come to pick her up. They used to pass this way often, and on the day Su Banru married, she watched the wedding car disappear down this same road. And in the end, dragging her suitcase behind her, she had followed this path one last time to reach the airport. While she was lost in these memories, a large hand suddenly appeared in front of her face. He waved to get her attention, and only then did she finally snap back to reality. He asked why she had suddenly frozen up, but she simply replied that it was nothing. The car came to a gentle stop in the courtyard of the Ju family home. As soon as we step out, the crowd lingers, and Mrs. Ju greets us with a great deal of enthusiasm. Without wasting any time, they quickly brought out the gifts they had carefully prepared, and naturally, they handed them over to one of the servants to be taken inside. After the customary greetings were finished, Mrs. Ju led them to the rooms she had readied for their stay. Both rooms were on the first floor, and upon opening the glass doors, a beautiful view of the back garden was revealed. After unpacking, they chatted with Aunt Ju for a while before heading toward the Feng residence with gifts in hand. They were going to visit her mother's respected master, so they told Aunt Ju not to bother saving any dinner for them. Mrs. Ju nodded, asking them to be careful as she watched them walk away into the distance. The distance between the Ju and Feng houses wasn't great, but Xia Jiacheng is a rather restless young man. He wouldn't stop asking her to tell him stories about the city of Hingcheng. Even though she lived there for 15 years, her life was a quiet routine between the club and the Feng house. And after Su Banru discovered her true feelings, she hardly went out at all, which was quite a lonely existence. The only exception was her occasional trip to the temple located on the outskirts of the mountain. The moment he heard about a temple, Xia Jiacheng began insisting that she take him there to pray whenever she had time. To be perfectly honest, he has always loved wandering around and exploring new places. Back in the United States, his mother kept a close eye on him, but returning home seemed to set him free. He was acting like a hyperactive monkey, practically jumping around with excitement. In the end, she couldn't resist his persistent begging and felt she had no choice but to agree. She promised to take him as soon as Grandpa Feng's birthday party was over. Finally satisfied with that answer, Xia Jiacheng let go of her hand and calmed down. Upon arriving at the Feng residence, we see the servants are already quite busy preparing everything necessary for the upcoming birthday banquet. As soon as the butler spotted them, he offered a warm welcome and ushered them inside without delay. In the living room, she immediately noticed the elderly Mr. Feng sitting comfortably on the sofa. She carefully placed the gift she had prepared beforehand onto the table. On behalf of her father and mother, she wished Grandpa Feng a fulfilling and happy old age. She wished him 3,000 years of life, while she and Xia Jiacheng hoped he'd enjoy the longevity of an ancient tree. After hearing this long string of heartfelt congratulations, Mr. Feng burst into a hearty laugh. He patted the gift, gestured toward the armrests of the chairs nearby, and kindly asked them to take a seat on the sofa. With genuine affection, he began to ask how her parents had been doing lately. She assured him everything was fine, though unfortunately, due to work commitments, they simply weren't able to make the trip to celebrate his birthday in person. The old man insisted it didn't matter, as the kind intention alone was more than enough for him. He then told Siyu to take them out for a walk, provided they returned in time for dinner that evening. He believed young people should be out exploring and getting to know the world. As for him, he felt his age, noting that his legs simply didn't carry him like they used to. They chatted for a while longer before saying their goodbyes to Mr. Feng and heading out with Feng Shiyu. Along the way, the three of them engaged in a very lively and animated conversation. In the middle of their excited chatter, Feng Shiyu suddenly slapped his forehead as if he'd forgotten something vital. He mentioned that just 15 days ago, he had joined a racing club to learn a bit and have some fun. He then recalled that Xian Chun used to race in the past, didn't she? He then asked if she wouldn't mind helping him check out the club to see if it was actually any good. After all, if it didn't suit him, he could always just look for another one. Upon hearing those words, we see the faces of both siblings suddenly go stiff with tension. Shiyu noticed immediately, wondering if something was wrong or if they simply wouldn't be able to go. She explained that, for certain personal reasons, her brother didn't want to return to the racetrack ever again. But Shiyu told them not to worry, insisting that they didn't have to go if it made them uncomfortable. They were his guests, after all, and he wanted to ensure they had a good time from start to finish. After saying that, he asked the butler standing nearby to go and notify the club of the change in plans. A little later, he took them to a nearby park to enjoy a much more peaceful afternoon. Meanwhile, over at the racing club, Song Hing-Nian was busy supervising a driver's training on the simulator. Ever since the news broke about the incident where he injured someone, the club's reputation had taken quite a hit. One by one, the members had begun jumping ship to join other, less controversial clubs. Due to this growing notoriety, fewer and fewer wealthy clients were willing to associate themselves with the brand. In the end, it was the master who had to pull many strings just to attract a few investors willing to keep them afloat. Just as everyone was training with great intensity, the master suddenly walked in looking rather displeased. He clapped his hands loudly and asked them what on earth they thought they were training for. He told everyone to just go home, leaving the entire group looking at each other in complete bewilderment. Even Song Hing-Nian, who had been sitting comfortably, stood up and remained silent, unsure of what to say. He slowly approached the master and asked why they were suddenly calling off the training session. The master snapped back that he had no idea, only that the Feng family had just sent word they weren't coming. They aren't going to invest in our club after all, and the moment he said those words, it was like throwing fuel onto a fire. Everyone began to murmur amongst themselves, and some, driven by sheer desperation, even broke down in tears. They had been counting on that money to cover the costs of their training and upcoming competitions. Upon hearing the complaints and laments filling the room, he simply stood there in silence. The master had nothing left to say, while Song Hing-Nien's face grew paler and paler with every passing second. He clenched his fist tightly and asked with desperate insistence, Why? Why was this happening? The master snapped that he didn't know, and Song Hing-Nien didn't even realize how he managed to walk out of there. The scorching afternoon sun beat down on him, stinging his eyes, but it was as if he couldn't feel a thing. He returned home, completely numb to the world, and bumped right into his partner, who was just about to head out. Instinctively, he asked her where she was going at such an hour. She shot back, asking why he even cared. To be honest, she wasn't interested in his concerns in the slightest. She was on her way out because, just a moment ago, Sumu had received an invitation from the Feng family. They were being invited to the birthday banquet of the old Master Feng himself. In reality, it wasn't her place to go, nor was she officially invited. But she had eavesdropped on Sumu saying that Ambassador Xia's son would also be in attendance. After everything that happened that day, everyone now knows that Ambassador Xia's son is actually me. At the thought that she might finally see me again, she decided that nothing else mattered. She chose to sneak into the Feng residence to try her luck and see if she could find me there. He protested, asking how it could not be his business when he was her husband. She coldly reminded him that they weren't legally married, and they hadn't even finished the wedding ceremony. She told him flatly that he wasn't her husband, and, having said that, she left without even a backward glance. Song Hing-Nien grit his teeth in frustration and began to follow her in secret. He knew perfectly well that if she was in such a hurry, there could only be one reason. She was going to see me. Meanwhile, Feng Xiu had taken Jechen and me out to enjoy ourselves for a while. When we finally returned, feeling quite happy, I spotted a very familiar silhouette right by the main entrance. To be honest, from the moment I lost all hope regarding Su Banru, things had changed. I never wanted to see her again, so my first instinct was to simply turn around and go the other way. But Su Banru saw me immediately, and there was no avoiding the encounter. I let out a quiet sigh as she called out Xiaoyu, and I turned to face her with a cold, distant expression. Su Banru instinctively tried to hug me, but the two men by my side stepped in to block her path. In the past, Su Banru would have simply screamed at them to get lost, as was her way. But now, she realized her current status didn't give her the right to act that way anymore. Besides, one of those two men happened to be the grandson of the old Master Feng himself. She knew very well that she couldn't afford to offend someone of his standing. He asked her what she wanted with his brother, clearly aware of what Su Banru was trying to do. My mother had warned him repeatedly upon returning to the country to be extremely careful with anyone from the Su family. And that warning applied especially to Su Banru and Song Hing-Nien. Su Banru froze at the question, opening her mouth to speak but finding no easy words. What was she supposed to say? That she only realized her feelings after I was already gone? Or that she wanted me back? As for Song Hing-Nien, he seemed to think he could move my heart as well. After all, we must remember that they weren't even married. She swallowed hard, her gaze fixed intently on Xiaoyu, who was standing right behind the others. Barely 6 months had passed, yet he looked much better than he ever did while living in the Su household. Those eyes of his, which had always seemed so dull and lifeless, were now filled with a vibrant light. She told him she knew she had made a mistake and that she never should have treated him that way. She had always convinced herself she didn't like him, and it wasn't until he left that she finally realized the truth. Deep down, she understood now that the person she truly loved was him. As for Song Hing-Nien, she claimed he was merely a tool she had used to make Xiaoyu jealous. And so, with a desperate hope, she asked if he could possibly give her another chance. She pleaded like a wife who, after years of mistakes, finally admits her guilt and begs for her husband's forgiveness. But unfortunately for her, he wasn't the type of man to wait around for an apology just to take someone back. As he listened to her response, his heart was filled with nothing but pure sarcasm. He reminded her that she used to say she only saw him as a brother, not as a man. She had told him he shouldn't have feelings for her, fearing the Su family would be ridiculed if they were discovered. She had used Song Hing-Nien as a weapon specifically to drive him away. He asked if he hadn't simply granted her wish, noting that she was the one who caused this, and now she was the one regretting it. Since when, he wondered, were things in this world ever that easy? His words, delivered one after another, caused Su Banru's fingers to tremble slightly. Back then, she only cared about uprooting his feelings for her, saying those cruel things without a second thought. He had believed that he no longer cared about anything that had happened in the past. But seeing Su Banru again and hearing her speak of the past caused all those buried memories to suddenly surge back into his heart. He asked her why she was begging for another chance now, when she had never seen fit to give him one back then. When their car had overturned in the ravine and he had pleaded for the special medicine, they had simply told him no. She hadn't given him anything, nothing to save his legs, and he wondered why she hadn't offered him a single chance in that moment. As he asked why she had left him with no hope, he began to stumble, tears streaming uncontrollably down his face. In that moment, we see that his eyes were filled with nothing but deep resentment and a lingering sense of betrayal. After all, they had known each other for 15 years. She knew his legs were his life, yet she still had the doctor give the medicine to Song Hing-Yen, who didn't even need it. Following that day, he had been haunted by nightmares night after night, which, to be honest, is hardly surprising. Xia Jiacheng, standing right by his side, listened to this painful outburst and held him with a look of profound sadness. He shook his head and continued, telling Su Banru that he had thought about many things after leaving for the United States. He admitted to her that he had been far too young and naive back then. His entire world had revolved around the simple idea of being with her. Because of that singular focus, he had never truly considered the consequences of his devotion. He told her he understood why she might hate or resent him. He truly did. But aside from loving her in secret, he had never done anything else to deserve such cruelty. He demanded to know why her hatred was so deep that she wanted to ensure he could never be a racing pilot again. She kept repeating that she would take care of him in the future, over and over again. But he looked at her and asked if she honestly believed that such a lie was even remotely credible. Su Banru tried her best to steady her breathing, but his words were like a sharp knife, mercilessly tearing through her heart. She had no idea how to respond, as in that moment, she hadn't even realized what she was truly feeling. She simply thought that by acting this way, she could make him give up on her, which is why she said those things. At the time, he was about to marry Song Jin-yen and remained blissfully unaware of the man's true nature. She had assumed that even if he couldn't work in the future, what he earned would be more than enough to support her. And she was certain, of course, that Song Jin-yen wouldn't mind in the slightest. But now, we see that everything has changed. She wouldn't even dare to say something like that anymore. He turned his head to look behind her, searching the shadows. There, hidden and clearly fearful, someone was lurking. It was obvious at a glance that the figure was Song Jin-yen. Remembering that he was the wretch responsible for his broken leg, he let out a cold, bitter laugh. He shouted out, demanding to know why the man was hiding there. Su Banru turned around to see for herself who was watching them. Her face darkened immediately, her expression clouding with sudden anger. It turned out that Song Jin-yen had been following her all along. She told him to get back to the house, but Song Jin-yen was already fuming after overhearing her words. And now that she was shouting at him, he stopped hiding, stood up, and approached them. He tried to grab Su Banru by the arm, but with a quick movement, she skillfully dodged him. He gritted his teeth and stared at our protagonist, measuring him up from head to toe. Finally, his gaze stopped and lingered on the man's injured leg. We returned to the club, which was on the verge of securing a sponsorship from the Fong family, while training was going perfectly. But suddenly, the coach arrived with the news that the sponsorship had been abruptly canceled. When they asked for a reason, they finally learned the truth. It was because our protagonist could no longer compete, and apparently, he couldn't stand to see the club succeed without him. He had supposedly influenced the Fong family to pull their financial support. Song Jin-yen scoffed, noting that the man was clearly just as selfish as he had always been. He told him to shut up, mockingly commenting on the supposedly fine manners of the Su family. Su Banru, unable to listen to any more of his nonsense, reached out and slapped him across the face. Song Jin-yen actually fell to the ground from the sheer force of the blow. His face turned red and began to swell almost immediately. She told him that if he didn't know how to speak properly, he should simply keep his mouth shut. No one would mistake him for being mute, she added, before instinctively trying to follow our protagonist, only for Song Jin-yen to shove her down. He reminded her that he was her husband and demanded to know how she dared to go after another man. Su Banru hit the ground hard, and a terrifying trail of blood began to stain her clothes. The situation turned dire as Su Banru remained motionless, her condition becoming more critical by the second. In a state of pure desperation, an ambulance was called to rush Su Banru to the hospital. As soon as Su Mu heard the news, he raced there as fast as he could. Without a word, he delivered a powerful slap to Song Jin-yen's face with all the strength he could muster. Ignoring all sense of propriety, he let out a curse for the very first time in his life. He demanded to know why on earth the man had gone out just to cause such a disaster. We see Su Mu resting peacefully at home, when suddenly the butler rushes in to deliver the shocking news that Su Banru is in the hospital. Terrified that something might happen to both Su Banru and his grandchild, he hurried to the hospital as fast as his legs could carry him. Right at the entrance, he ran into the Fong family servants and finally learned the full extent of the stupidity Song Jin-yen had committed. Our protagonist made it clear that he was no longer the Su family's adopted son, but rather the son of a high-ranking diplomat. The Su family status had plummeted so far that they simply couldn't afford to offend him anymore, not that they seemed to realize it. To make matters worse, while Song Jin-yen was hurling insults, the grandson of the powerful Fong family was standing right there. We should remember that last time, the one ordered to capture Su Banru was none other than Fong Shiyu's eldest uncle. Upon learning that our protagonist was actually fine, Su Mu raised his hand in a fit of rage and delivered a sharp slap. And for good measure, he slapped Su Banru as well, a moment of pure, unbridled frustration. He demanded to know what kind of position she thought she held now that everything had changed. He asked her what she thought Xiao Yu's status was, and how she could possibly be bold enough to go looking for him. He questioned Su Banru, asking if after everything she had done in the past, she truly believed she deserved anything. Did she really think he would forgive her? She simply told her mother that she already knew what she had to do. Her words, far from calming Su Mu, nearly gave him a heart attack as he clutched his chest in distress. Once he finished speaking, Su Mu didn't even look back at them as he stormed out of the room in a fury. He told her to get those ideas out of her head. The baby was gone, and there would be no second chances. For him, this tragic loss was almost a blessing in disguise, a dark thought, to be sure. Now he could finally seek his revenge without anything left to hold him back or slow him down. He could go after him without a single worry about what might happen next, repeating the question of his safety over and over. Seeing the dark and somber expression on Su Banru's face, Song Jinyan could only grit his teeth in silence. On the day of Mr. Feng's birthday, we see the venue packed with guests from all over. After delivering the gift, Xia Jiacheng and our protagonist stepped aside to find a quiet corner. They were discussing a future trip to the mountain temple to offer their prayers. He reminded her that it gets quite cold on the mountain, so she should remember to dress warmly. Besides, he noted that the temple only serves vegetarian food, a detail worth remembering. So, he suggested that bringing just a bit of water and some crackers would be more than enough. Suddenly, he noticed a shadow falling over him, interrupting their private conversation. He looked up and found Su Banru standing right there, directly in front of them. She asked what he was doing and if they were really planning to go to that temple on the outskirts. He calmly remarked that he never knew she had the hobby of eavesdropping on other people's business. Without bothering to answer her further, he took Xia Cheng by the hand and began walking away. Su Banru tried to follow them, but someone else approached her to talk, blocking her path. For the rest of the party, she never got another chance to speak a single word to him. Later, at the mountain temple outside the city, the sky began to brighten as the fog grew thick. Great, heavy clouds of white vapor rose with the mist, completely blanketing the path ahead. Xia Jiacheng and our protagonist walked step by step along the stone trail, slowly climbing toward the summit. In the distance, the wind howled as Buddhist chants and the echo of bells drifted through the lifting fog. Inside the temple, ancient trees towered over them, and the stone slabs were covered in soft moss. The wind made the falling leaves whisper, while the bronze bells hanging from the eaves chimed softly. He took a deep breath and sat down on a stone bench in a quiet corner to rest. He watched Jia Cheng, who looked like a curious child, taking in everything around her with wide eyes. By all accounts, it should have been a perfect moment. But, as fate would have it, the arrival of Su Banru interrupted their peace. She looked like a ghost. At least, that was the first thought that crossed his mind as he saw her approaching. She asked him, quite softly, if they could finally have a quiet word together. To be honest, he had no desire to speak with her, but he knew she would soon be returning to the United States. He realized that if she kept pestering him and followed him there, it was better to make things clear once and for all. And so, even though he was about to stand up, he decided to sit back down. He asked her what she wanted to talk about, and a flash of joy instantly crossed Su Banru's eyes. She was just about to sit by his side, but he quickly stood up and walked toward the exit. He stopped under a Bodhi tree and waited for Su Banru, who had followed him closely. He told her he was in a hurry and that if she had something to say, she should say it now. Su Banru took a deep breath and let out everything she had been wanting to say for the last 6 months. She claimed she never actually liked Sun Jianjian. Being with him was just an act to make our protagonist give up. She insisted she had no idea Sun Jianjian was hurting him, repeating her excuses as if to convince herself. That was why she chose to save Sun Jianjian first back then, because, after all, he was her fiancé at the time. She further explained they only had a ceremony and never legally married, and that the child had been an accident. It was her mother who had wanted the baby, and besides, she had already lost it anyway. She promised him that she was going to get rid of Sun Jianjian immediately. In short, she hoped he would come back to her, so they could go back to the way things were before. For the first time in a long while, he took a moment to truly look at the woman standing before him. On the surface, she looked exactly the same as she always had, but he couldn't help but wonder, why? Why did she suddenly feel like a complete and total stranger to him? He told her calmly that it didn't matter why she had chosen to be with Sun Jianjian in the first place. Regardless of her motives, the simple truth was that she had hurt him deeply. Given Sun Jianjian's inherent cowardice, the man would never have dared to lay a finger on him alone. Everything that man had done was only possible because she had given him her silent consent. She was the one who first ignored him, the one who treated him with coldness, and the one who struck the first blow. Sun Jianjian had merely followed her lead, learning from her exactly how to cause him pain. To be honest, he told her, the two of them were actually perfect for each other. At those words, Su Banru's face turned a ghostly shade of pale. She had never imagined, not even in her wildest dreams, that he would compare her to someone like Sun Jianjian. In her mind, she didn't even like the man, he was beneath her. Especially after discovering his true nature, she felt nothing but a growing sense of loathing toward him. He reminded her that he had never been the one to pull away. It was she who had pushed him aside first. She was the one who had systematically extinguished every spark of hope he once held. He admitted that he used to like her very much, simply because she was the first person to be kind to him at the Sioux house. She had occupied nearly his entire adolescence, which is why he had developed such deep feelings for her. But once she cast him out, he saw the world for what it was and realized she wasn't indispensable after all. He concluded by noting that she and Sun Jianjian had done far too many repulsive things to ever be forgiven. And now, with a fresh start, you simply want to overlook all of that and have us be fine again. That, quite frankly, is completely impossible. Because of what you both did, my leg will never allow me to compete in races ever again. As long as my leg continues to ache, it is simply impossible for me to forgive. Su Banru, you are very selfish at times, even if on the surface it seems like you're thinking of others. In reality, you only ever worry about yourself. To push me away, you faked a relationship with Sun Jianjian that became real, and now, to get me back, you say you never loved him. In your mind, we are nothing more than tools for you to use. We remember the Su Banru who once said that he would be her priority and that she would never hurt him. You were the one who broke that promise, so with what right do you ask me to return and forgive you? One truth after another struck him, causing him to slowly close his eyes. The words he wanted to say became painfully difficult to utter as bitterness spread through his mouth. Suddenly, he realized he couldn't take any more, and as he moved toward the door, he recalled a night long ago when he was afraid and couldn't sleep. Imagine the scene. She sat at the edge of his bed, holding a teddy bear, and told him a bedtime story. At the end of the tale, she placed the little bear right next to his pillow. With a voice full of conviction, she told him that his big sister, just like that bear, would protect him forever. I will never hurt you, she had said. You will always be your sister's first choice. He had smiled then, telling her she was surely just spoiling him. But she insisted, suggesting they make a formal promise right then and there. He had agreed, saying that if she ever truly hurt him, he would never speak to her again. A silent tear slipped from the corner of her eye, tracing a path of quiet regret. Su Banru opened her eyes once more, looking up at the person standing before her. But he, without a single backward glance, simply began his descent down the mountain. Xiaoyu. He paused for a brief moment at the sound of his name, but he didn't turn around. Is there truly no longer any chance for us? She asked, her voice trembling. Still without turning, he felt as though he couldn't take another step. He felt like an utter disaster. The weight of it all was too much, and finally, Su Banru covered her face and broke into bitter sobs. Banru. In Song Jinyan's eyes, there was no longer any hate or resentment, only a profound, heavy sadness. In the past, to climb the social ladder through Su Banru, he had done all sorts of terrible things. He had even lost the only person who had ever been truly good to him. And just when he had finally become the golden son-in-law that everyone envied, he discovered the truth about the woman to whom he had given his entire heart. She had held someone else in her heart for a very long time. His eyes filled with a mixture of confusion and utter helplessness. Especially after overhearing our conversation, he finally understood the reality of his situation. Su Banru didn't love anyone. She was only ever capable of caring for herself. And just like that, over 4 years of his effort and sacrifice had been thrown away. It had all turned to dust, scattered, and lost to the wind. He knew that if he were thinking clearly, he should leave Su Banru immediately. He should leave the Su family behind, but by now, the Song family had severed all ties with him. To make matters worse, Su Fu and Sumu didn't like him either. The only thing he could do was cling with everything he had to the woman standing right in front of him. And so, hiding his sadness, he looked at Su Banru with hope and tried to take her hand. Banru, you still have me. Why don't we just try to be happy together, alright? But Su Banru, much like our protagonist had done moments before, turned around and left without even a glance. In that moment, the very last shred of hope in his heart was shattered into 1,000 pieces. He knew then that there was no remedy. We see Xiaoyu waiting at the airport until, finally, Xiaxiachen arrives in a hurry. Where were you? Why did it take you so long to get here? I went to the hospital to see the joke of the year, she replied. What joke? Well, it turns out Song Jinyan's love turned to hate, and he pushed Su Banru down a ravine. She suffered multiple fractures, and, because the rescue took so long to arrive, they had to amputate both of her legs. As for Song Jinyan, he lost his balance, fell, and ended up ruining his own legs as well. When Sumo found out, she actually fainted from the sheer rage of it all. And Su Fu ordered the butler to throw those two out of the house and leave them to their fate the moment they were discharged. But as luck would have it, bad luck, that is, they hadn't even left the hospital before they started fighting again. They tumbled down the stairs together, and now, both of them are in a vegetative state. Are you happy now? She asked, but he simply wondered why he should even care. The plane is about to take off, he noted. I think I'll just get some sleep. He didn't pay her any more attention and simply closed his eyes, letting the world fade away. The plane soared into the sky, disappearing gracefully into the clouds.